Opposition parties have slammed President Cyril Ramaphosa's plan of action in response to state capture. In an address to the nation on Sunday night, President Ramaphosa announced the steps that his administration will take to implement the recommendations of the Zondo Commission of Inquiry. Now, the Democratic Alliance says the president's plan is lacking in many ways.
The address, in my view, was wholly inadequate, particularly considering the fact that, some of these revelations are now coming to the fore. And the president understands that, and he better than anybody else knows that, new evidence is coming to the fore regarding this Phala matter. And so there is greater need, so to speak, to not only seem to be credible in terms of fighting corruption, but also to actually be in earnest. And so his address yesterday was lacking in many ways. For instance, the president didn't mention not once a single minister that he will be dismissing from his cabinet following the tabling of the report. And 4 months he's had to essentially study the report, make the political considerations he needs to make, and yet, there was just a throwaway line about how he will be considering his options, which in our view is rather, it's simply not good enough.
Well, for more on the legacy of State Capture Commission of Inquiry, we're joined in studio by the Secretary of the Inquiry, Professor Itumeleng Mosala. And thank you very much for making the time, Professor, all the way from Pretoria. This is very, very important. We've been waiting for this moment. No country has ever investigated fraud, or at least allegations of fraud and corruption, in a systemic manner that we have done in this country. What do you hope the legacy of this commission should be?
Thank you very much, Xoli. You're absolutely right. Not to my knowledge, I don't know of any country that has put together in a systematic way over the time that we have done and put together as much data in one place. The argument is not that nobody has also done some investigation on corruption, but to bring together the amount of evidence and data on corruption to make it look us in our own face as South Africa, and to have been led in the manner in which we've been led, both by the Chief Justice and I should say that the government that put this together.
Yeah.
No other government has done this to itself.
All right. And so a question will come in a moment about what then do you say to people who will be of the view that we have seen many commissions of inquiry come and go. Those reports are lying somewhere, gathering dust. But before we get there, this stands out, this commission. Yeah. It stands out as having been one of the most expensive the country has ever conducted. Was it value for money?
Certainly value for money. I think more than value for money. We must work on the numbers. People say it's expensive. Relative to what? If you look at the billions of rands that are coming back into the country that had been stolen, would have been lost forever, that are going to be coming back, we're not finished yet. We now have started the route of following up on everything that everybody who has stolen from our people will have to bring back unless we don't catch them.
Yeah, and so far, how much has been collected? I listened with interest yesterday. The evidence leader, Paul Pretorius, was being interviewed on radio, and he spoke about billions that have been recovered. So relative to the 1 billion rand, do you think that the commission has actually done its best and actually, to some extent, recouped that billion
definitely
rand?
We've definitely exceeded the 1 billion rand that we've spent on ourselves. The numbers will have to be done. We have to be accurate on numbers, and I think that will be an important exercise for the sake of our people, just so we know exactly where we stand.
Let's then talk, Professor, about this commission report not gathering dust, as many people or as many skeptics would say, of the previous commissions of inquiry. Let's talk about the key recommendations to have come out of this commission that you think is going to make the work of not just investigating corruption in the country, but future-proofing the country.
Yes, absolutely. I think our people need to remember or be reminded that the focus was not just on catching the individuals who stole, who acted corruptly and putting them in jail. That obviously is an important part of what needs to happen. But what the recommendations of the Commission do is to focus on the institutions and the legal loopholes and the systems that just did not defend us against corruption and against thieves. I mean, the recommendations touch on the National Treasury, they touch on Parliament, they touch on SOEs, they touch on institutions that are supposed to be the guardians of the entire system of government. They touch on everybody. And actually the key issue is what the President is going to do about those institutions. Because remember, there are laws in the country, and some of the things that happened should not have happened. So the question is, why should we continue to trust those institutions? What is the President going to do about those institutions? What is Parliament is going to do about those institutions? That, for me, is the key focus of the recommendations.
Well, let's talk about one of the institutions, and that's the National Prosecuting Authority. One of the recommendations from the Commission was that of the establishment of an anti-corruption agency. Do you think, for example, from Sunday's address, that particular element has been covered by the President, or it is not quite what the Commission wanted? And what would be the major difference between how the National Prosecuting Authority operates now versus what the Commission wanted, which is this anti-corruption agency?
My sense was that the President sees that as complementary to the NPA. The NPA has to continue to work and has to be strengthened to work, capacitated to work. I saw the Minister's interview yesterday indicating that more resources are going to be made available to enable it to work. But it has to have alongside it another institution which in a sense represents, in data science we talk about predictive models, which is the source of predictive models that will make sure that this thing does not come again. You can't wait for it to happen again and then have another commission to deal with it again. You have to actually put in place the tools and models that make sure that we can detect it a long way before it happens.
And some of those, are you convinced that what is contained in the report, in the state capture report, it gives some clues about what government ought to do in order to put together those predictive models?
No, absolutely. Well, one of the things that's coming out is, as we said at the beginning, the data that we've collected as the Commission. That is now going to be the legacy that is passed over to government under the Department of Justice, which, for example, the NPA will have priority, first priority in accessing that, in bringing together specialists who can use those tools or create the tools out of the data. You know, your data analysts, all kinds of specialist people who can work on that data. We're talking about big stuff. We're talking about a petabyte of data. And those who know say we're talking about a petabyte, that means about 500 billion printed pages of evidence.
Wow.
Some people say 3 times the size of Johannesburg.
Oh my goodness.
That's what we've got.
So, Professor, coming out of this commission, the hope for many South Africans was that we are going to see prosecutions on an unprecedented scale. What you've observed thus far, does it talk to that?
I think it's a beginning. I think we need a faster rate. We need scope. We need more people behind that project of facilitating that to happen. And that's why we come back again to the ID and the NPA. Everybody has to put their support behind those two institutions. When it's one institution, one-in-one institution. But absolutely, without a strong NPA and a strong ID and a properly supported NPA, I think that will not happen at the rate at which it should happen. It has started, though.
Let's talk about the procurement processes, government procurement processes, because that has been one area which has allowed for the corruption we have been told about on an unprecedented scale to take place. Is the Commission satisfied with the recommendations it has made in order for government to switch off the taps?
I think the Commission has done what it could do in the time that it had. But an indication has been very, very, very clearly made as to how much change needs to happen, and that, in fact, change needs to happen in that particular sphere. My own view is that, again, it needs all of us South Africans. It really cannot be left to government alone. And the President was on point yesterday when he said, the other day, when he said that South Africa as a whole must come to the party.
Yeah.
We've got to be given the power to, well, I can't say deal with the corrupt people because it's a law and order based society, you know. But we've got to be able to be allowed to name and shame and expose as a nation. We need mechanisms for doing that.
One of the unintended consequences of recommendations such as an anti-corruption agency, Professor, would be that you would render institutions of government completely useless because you are going to have the creation of an anti-corruption industry. How do you, let me use a living example.
Yeah.
In South Africa, we have a problem of feeling unsafe in our homes because we no longer trust that the police can act quickly enough to come and protect us. And so the security industry, private security industry, has mushroomed on a massive scale. That is what I'm trying to get at. Do you think that there are unintended consequences that will come as a result of the country trying to future-proof itself against corruption and therefore not trusting state institutions to do that?
I agree 100% with that view. Studies have been done elsewhere in the world. I know, for example, that in the U.S., in the state of New York, some time back, a study was done that proved exactly that point, that you've got to be careful. You can't have non-state institutions taking over the institutions of the state, because the institutions of the state are products of the people's will. The other institutions have other intentions and other objectives other than our own. They may be, for example, I mean, if you take security, which is a very important example that you make, it may very well be that its work is to bring about security, but its primary objective is to make profit.
Yeah.
And you don't want that to happen. I think that some sophistication on the way in which government and parliament deals with that particular issue will be required. It's a particularly serious and dangerous unintended consequence.
I'm out of time, but I've got to give the viewers at least something that stands out from you and the work that you have done. The President congratulated this commission on Sunday on the work that you have done. What stands out for you as having been one experience that you take with you and you say, I'm proud of what we did? Apart from the fact that the irony was that you are the second secretary of this commission. The first one had to go because of allegations of doing wrong things. Wasn't that the irony?
Certainly, but I can't comment on that.
I know.
But what I will say in response to your question is that South Africa must be proud of itself for having allowed this commission to come into being and to function in the way in which it did. Men and women came up to serve the nation through the commission as investigators, as legal teams, and as the administrative support. And they worked endlessly, many hours, for a lot of times without pay. There were times when people were not paid for 6, 7, 8 months because there was no money. The money had run out. And they stayed on. They did not leave. They worked and worked and worked. They were so committed to it. And the issue about that is that South Africa trusted us to come up with something.
Yeah.
And we needed to do that with or without pay, in spite of the story about the 1 billion rand.
Professor Itumeleng Mosala, let me thank you very much for making the time to come talk to us here. Thanks indeed
for you very much,
sharing your thoughts. All right, that's Professor Itumeleng Mosala. He was the Secretary of the Commission of Inquiry into State Capture.